The moment her stepmother grabbed the clippers, she thought it was just another cruel punishment, all because she gave her jacket to a shivering old man on the street. She shaved her head to teach her a lesson: humiliation, control, power. But what she didn't know, what none of us knew in that moment, was that the freezing man she mocked and dismissed wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO of the company she worked for. And that single act of kindness was about to flip her entire life upside down. 23-year-old Emily Carter stood frozen in the center of the bathroom, barefoot on cold tile, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. Her long chestnut hair, once the only thing she felt proud of, fell in loose waves down her back. For now, the bathroom light burned overhead, harsh and surgical, exposing everything Emily wished she could hide. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the sink, nails digging into porcelain hard enough to ache. She didn't move. She had learned that moving made things worse. Behind her, Diane Carter clicked the electric clippers on and off, the sound deliberate, taunting. She smiled, not wide, not dramatic, but with quiet satisfaction, the kind that came from certainty. This wasn't anger. Anger would have been messy. This was pleasure. Diane reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Emily noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, her voice thin. Diane laughed softly, amused. "Relax. This is for me. I like to remember important moments." She set the phone down, angling it carefully so the mirror, Emily's face, and her hair were perfectly framed. "You see," Diane continued, almost conversational, "people like you rewrite history. You'll tell everyone you were abused, that you're some innocent martyr. This way, I get the truth." The lens stared at Emily like an accusation. Emily's stomach churned. "All this," Diane said, lifting the clippers, "because you wanted to play savior." Emily swallowed hard. Her throat burned not from shouting, because she hadn't, but from holding everything in. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, as if understanding it differently might save her now. The old man, the sidewalk, the wind. Just hours earlier, Emily had been walking home from her shift at the diner, her jacket pulled tight against the early winter cold. She remembered seeing him near the bus stop, thin coat, shaking hands, eyes trained on the pavement, like he'd learned invisibility was safer than hope. She hadn't hesitated. That instinct to help had always disgusted Diane. "You don't give away things you didn't earn," Diane snapped now, stepping closer. "That jacket was mine, and you gave it to trash." Emily flinched. She had tried to explain earlier that her father believed kindness mattered, that the man looked like he might collapse, that it was just a jacket. Diane hadn't listened. Explanations were weaknesses Diane enjoyed crushing. "This," Diane said slowly, lifting a thick section of Emily's hair, "is what happens when you forget who owns you." The clippers touched Emily's scalp. The first strip of hair fell into the sink. Emily gasped, not from pain, but from the sound. The buzzing swallowed everything. Locks slid down her shoulders and gathered at her feet, dark against white tile, each one a quiet theft. Diane went slow, excruciatingly slow. She paused often, letting the silence suffocate. When Emily shut her eyes, Diane grabbed her chin roughly and yanked her face toward the mirror. "No," Diane said sharply. "You don't get to look away." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she watched herself change piece by piece into someone unrecognizable. Diane smiled at the reflection. "There it is," she murmured. "That look, that's obedience." "You embarrassed me," Diane continued, voice rising deliberately so the phone would catch every word. "Do you know how stupid I looked watching you hand my property to a stranger?" Emily's breath shook. Flashbacks tore through her, her father's gentle voice, his hands steady on her shoulders, telling her she was allowed to be kind. His death, 3 years earlier, had left her defenseless, handed over to someone who mistook cruelty for strength. Diane loved reminding her of that. "I worked too hard to be dragged down by you," Diane said. "You will not ruin me." The clippers buzzed again. More hair fell. Emily's scalp burned, exposed to cold air and humiliation. She caught her reflection, eyes red, face pale, jaw locked tight. Even now, she didn't beg. That infuriated Diane. "You think you're strong," Diane hissed. "You think this makes you good." Emily's voice came out quiet but unbroken. "I just didn't want him to freeze." The clippers shut off. Silence slammed into the room. Then Diane laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Freeze," she repeated. "People like him don't freeze. They rot." She turned the clippers back on and shoved Emily toward the hallway, continuing the shave as she dragged her forward. The front door was open. Neighbors passed. Someone slowed. Someone stopped. Phones came out. Diane didn't flinch. "Stand up straight," she ordered. "Let them see what happens when girls like you get ideas." Hair fell onto the living room floor, into the doorway, onto the welcome mat. By the time Diane finished, Emily's head was raw, patchy, red. Tears streaked her face, but her posture stayed upright, not because she wasn't broken, but because she refused to give Diane the satisfaction. Diane stopped recording and reviewed the video, nodding. "Perfect. This," she said coldly, holding up her phone, "is what I do to people who forget their place." What neither of them knew, what Diane would never consider, was that the nobody Emily helped was watching more than just kindness that night. He was watching cruelty, memorizing faces, listening to voices, a man who never forgot injustice. Emily didn't know any of that yet. She only knew her hair was gone, her dignity had been stripped in public, and the woman who did it had enjoyed every second. And Diane, certain she had won, the wind had cut sharply through downtown Riverton, threading between buildings like it had intent. It wasn't the kind of cold that announced itself loudly. It slipped in quietly, found the cracks, and stayed. Emily Carter walked faster than usual, arms crossed tightly, her jacket zipped to her chin. Her head still burned from Diane's grip earlier that morning, not the clippers yet, but the words, the constant reminders of ownership, of debt, of obedience. She had learned to move through the world small, efficient, unnoticed. That night, she failed. The bus stop sat half-lit, a dull halo flickering above peeling paint and a metal bench scarred by time. Most people avoided it, unless they had no choice. Emily would have walked past too if not for the man standing just outside the light. He didn't pace. He didn't beg. He didn't make himself visible. He simply stood there, shoulders hunched, hands trembling despite being shoved deep into the pockets of a coat that had long since given up its fight against winter. Emily slowed. Diane's voice surfaced in her head immediately, sharp and familiar. "Don't attract attention. Don't bring problems home. You don't owe anyone anything." Emily told herself to keep walking. Then the man coughed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was restrained, controlled, like someone who had learned that weakness invited punishment. That sound undid her. Emily stopped and turned. "Sir?" she asked gently. The man looked up, surprised, as if he hadn't expected to be acknowledged at all. His eyes were alert, keen, intelligent but carefully guarded. He straightened slightly, instinctively defensive. "I'm fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. Emily shook her head. "You're freezing." She reached for her zipper before her fear could catch up with her conscience. The jacket slid off her shoulders and into her hands. She draped it over him carefully, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter him. The man inhaled sharply as warmth settled around him, not just physical warmth, but something older and rarer. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," Emily replied. "I want to." For a moment, the city seemed to pause around them. The man studied her face, taking in details most people missed: the tired eyes, the faint bruising on her wrist, the way she stood like she was braced for impact, even while being kind. "People don't usually notice," he said quietly. Emily offered a small smile. "I do." That was when headlights washed over them. A familiar car slowed. Emily's stomach dropped. Diane's car rolled to a stop with deliberate slowness, like a predator assessing distance. The window lowered. Diane's eyes swept the scene in a single glance. Emily, the jacket, the man. Her mouth twisted, Not with anger, but with contempt. "What?" Diane said sharply. "Are you doing?" Emily turned. "He's cold." Diane laughed, short, sharp, humiliating. "Of course he is." Her gaze flicked to the man, dismissive, dehumanizing. "She's confused," Diane said to him. "She thinks every sob story is real." The man opened his mouth to speak. Diane cut him off without even looking at him. "Get in the car, Emily. Now." Emily hesitated, eyes darting back to the man. "I'll be okay," he said quietly. "You've already done more than enough." End quote. Diane slammed the car door from the inside. "That jacket," she snapped, "was not yours to give away." Emily climbed into the passenger seat, heart racing. As Diane pulled away, the man watched the car disappear. He noted the license plate, the way Diane gripped the steering wheel, the tone she used, familiar with cruelty, practiced in dominance. He pulled the jacket tighter around himself. Beneath the frayed sleeve of his coat, a watch caught the light, briefly expensive, understated, unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Charles Harrington did. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply decided. Across town, Diane ranted the entire drive home about embarrassment, about image, about control. She didn't notice Emily's silence. She never did. And as the car disappeared into traffic, something else disappeared with it. Diane's anonymity. By morning, the video had a name. Someone titled it, "Stepmother Shaves Daughter's Head for Helping Homeless Man." By noon, it had millions of views. Emily Carter didn't know any of that when she woke up. She sat up slowly in bed, scalp aching where the clippers had scraped too close, the skin tight and tender. For a brief, disoriented moment, she forgot what had happened. Then she reached up, felt the uneven stubble, and the memory slammed back into her like a physical blow. The buzzing, the laughter, the phone recording. She pulled a knit beanie over her head with shaking hands and stared at herself in the mirror. The hat didn't hide the redness at her temples. It didn't hide the way her face looked older, harder, like something had been carved out of her. Diane was already gone. No note, no apology, just silence, which somehow felt louder. Emily went to work anyway. The diner smelled like grease and burnt coffee, familiar and usually comforting. The bell over the door jingled as she stepped inside. Then it stopped. Every head turned. Rachel, standing behind the counter, froze mid-sentence, her face drained of color. "Emily," she whispered. "Oh my God." Emily frowned. "What?" Rachel didn't answer. She just held out her phone. The screen showed a paused video. Emily recognized the bathroom immediately. Her stomach dropped. She watched herself on screen, smaller, silent, compliant, while Diane's voice filled the diner, sharp and unmistakable. "Watch. If you're going to be taught a lesson, you're going to see it." Emily's hands began to shake. Customers stared openly now. One woman covered her mouth. Another looked furious. A man at the counter muttered, "That's sick." Rachel grabbed Emily's arm. "It's everywhere," she said, voice breaking. "TikTok, Instagram. News sites picked it up an hour ago." Emily's chest tightened. "How?" Rachel swallowed. "Someone from your street uploaded it. They said they couldn't sleep after seeing it." The room blurred. Emily stumbled into the bathroom and locked the door just as her phone began to vibrate nonstop. Unknown numbers, messages, notifications piling up faster than she could read them. She slid down the wall and pressed her hands over her ears, but Diane's voice played on anyway. From memory, from phones outside, from the world. The internet did what it always did. It dissected. Screenshots circled Diane's face. Her name surfaced. Her employer was tagged thousands of times. Comments multiplied by the second. That woman should never be allowed near a child. This is abuse. Plain and simple. Someone protect that girl. Fire her. Expose her. Local reporters showed up at the diner by mid-afternoon. Emily was sent home early, not out of shame, but safety. Across town, Diane's day unraveled in real time. Her phone buzzed during a meeting. Then again, Then again. By the time she checked it, her face was already everywhere. Colleagues stared at her. Someone whispered. Another slid their chair away. Her boss didn't yell. He simply said, "HR needs to see you, now." At the same moment, Charles Harrington watched the video alone in his office. He watched every second. He didn't look away. He noticed details others missed: the way Diane positioned the camera, the satisfaction in her tone, the absence of hesitation. He closed his laptop slowly and made a call. Back at home, Emily sat on her bed, phone buzzing endlessly. Among the messages, strangers offering support, rage directed at Diane. One notification stood out. A single text. Charles Harrington. "Emily, this is the man you helped last night. We need to talk." Emily stared at the message, heart pounding. She had no idea yet how far the consequences would go. But Diane was about to learn that humiliation, once released into the world, doesn't stay contained. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than it ever had. Diane Carter stood rigid inside the glass box, jaw clenched, eyes locked forward. Her phone vibrated non-stop in her hand, but she refused to look at it. She already knew what it would say. Notifications, mentions, messages she could no longer control. When the doors opened, conversation on the executive floor stopped. Not gradually, instantly. People turned. Some stared. Some looked away too quickly. Others didn't bother hiding their disgust. Diane recognized the shift immediately, the subtle but unmistakable signal that her authority had evaporated overnight. She straightened her blazer anyway. Power, she told herself, was about posture. The boardroom doors were already open. Inside, the entire executive team was present: HR, legal, compliance, 2 outside consultants, a media relations director pale with stress. At the head of the table sat Charles Harrington. Diane's stomach dropped. He looked nothing like the man at the bus stop. The warmth was gone, the gentleness stripped away. What remained was precision. "Miss Carter," the board chair said coolly, "have a seat." Diane opened her mouth to speak. "Don't," the legal counsel said quietly. She sat. No one offered her water. No one smiled. Charles didn't acknowledge her at first. He stood and connected his laptop to the screen behind him. The video filled the wall. Diane's own voice echoed through the room, calm, deliberate, unmistakably cruel. "Watch. If you're going to be taught a lesson, you're going to see it." Emily's shaved head appeared in high definition. No one spoke. Someone in HR wiped their eyes. Charles let the video play to the end. Then he turned. "I want to be very clear," he said evenly. "This meeting is not about public relations." He looked directly at Diane. "It's about character." Diane finally found her voice. "You don't understand the context." Charles raised a hand. She stopped, mid-sentence. "I spent decades building this company," he continued, "and I learned something early on. People don't become monsters under pressure. Pressure reveals what was already there." He gestured to the frozen image on the screen. Diane's face caught in a moment of satisfaction. "This," he said, "is not discipline. It is enjoyment." The room felt suffocating. The board chair spoke next. "Miss Carter, effective immediately, your employment is terminated for gross ethical violations." HR slid a folder across the table. Inside, termination papers, a suspension notice for her professional certifications, documentation of a mandatory abuse report filed with state authorities. Security appeared at the door, not discreetly, publicly. Phones were already out in the hallway. Diane stood slowly, hands trembling for the first time. "This is a mistake," she said, voice cracking. "You're destroying my career." Charles met her gaze without blinking. "No," he said quietly. "You did that yourself. We're just not hiding it." Security escorted her out. Employees watched from glass offices and open desks as Diane was led down the hall. The woman who once ruled the floor now reduced to whispers and raised phones. Someone muttered, "That's her." Someone else said, "She deserves worse." By the time the elevator doors closed, Diane's face was already trending again, this time under a new headline. Executive fired after abuse video goes viral. Charles returned to his seat and exhaled slowly. Then he picked up his phone. "Get me Emily Carter," he said. Across town, Emily sat in silence, unaware that the woman who shaved her head was losing everything in full view of the world. And for the first time in her life, the power imbalance was finally, irrevocably reversed. Emily Carter sat alone on the edge of her bed as the sun dipped below the buildings outside her window. The room was quiet in the way that only comes after chaos, when the noise has burned itself out, leaving behind something heavier. Her phone lay face down beside her. She hadn't turned it off. She couldn't. Every vibration still made her flinch, even though the messages had shifted from shock to sympathy, from outrage to concern. Her scalp still ached. She stood and walked to the mirror. Slower this time. The beanie came off. The reflection staring back at her was unfamiliar, but no longer fragile. The redness had faded to a dull pink. The stubble had begun to grow back unevenly, stubbornly. Proof she was still here. There was a knock at the door. Emily stiffened, then forced herself to breathe before opening it. Charles Harrington stood in the hallway, coat neatly buttoned, expression serious but gentle, not apologetic, not distant, present. "I didn't want to call again," he said. "I thought it would be better to say this in person." Emily nodded and stepped aside. They sat across from each other, the air thick with things that didn't need saying. "You didn't deserve any of it," Charles said finally. Emily let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for years. "I know." That mattered more than sympathy ever could. "I've arranged legal support," he continued. "Not as charity, as accountability. And I want you to decide what comes next, not me." Emily listened, but what stayed with her wasn't the offers or the resources. It was the word accountability. Across town, Diane Carter sat in a dark apartment that no longer felt temporary. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched. Her phone lay on the table, screen lit with a dozen unread notifications she couldn't bring herself to open. She had lost her job, her reputation, her professional standing, her social circle, and she had gained something she had never known how to live with: silence. The kind that doesn't answer back. No one defended her. No one contextualized her actions. No one softened the narrative. Every article used the same words: abuse, cruelty, enjoyment. The video never went away. Weeks passed. Emily moved out quietly. No dramatic confrontation. No final speech. She packed what mattered and left the rest behind. Diane watched from the doorway, powerless for the first time, unable to demand obedience or extract fear. Emily didn't look back. Months later, Emily walked past the same bus stop, winter again. She paused, not because of pain, but because of memory. The city moved around her, indifferent, relentless. She adjusted her coat and kept walking. She didn't owe the world forgiveness. She owed herself a future. Somewhere else, Diane scrolled endlessly through comments she could never erase. Her name now a warning instead of a credential. Power had left her, and it had taken everything with it. Emily touched her hair short, uneven, growing. She smiled. Not because justice was perfect, but because survival was louder than cruelty ever had been.